I say again, let me just make sure that my chat is working. I went out and tried to vote for a socialist candidate on my ballot and found out that in the state of Michigan, I was not allowed to write in a name. And you know, there is a history in America of people voting for Mickey Mouse. There is a history of people voting for imaginary characters. Because when they do, they're sending a clear and deliberate message that this system is so broken that I refuse to participate with it. I would rather vote for Donald Duck than for what the Republicans or the Democrats have put forward to me. And having the ability within a political system to voice that in some way. To say, I want to vote for fucking, you know, Benny the animal. I want to vote for, pull up one reference in your head, Pawn. One single reference. It's, in particular, I'm trying to think of Adventure Time. I want to vote for Finn and Jake for president and vice presidency. The ability to do that means that even when you are disenfranchised, you can have a voice and you can speak. And I found out that in the state of Michigan, I don't have that right. And that was about the time I stopped voting. Because they don't care. They don't want you to speak unless you're saying what they want to hear. And by they, I mean the two parties. And I was saying, I don't want either of you motherfuckers. And they said, well, we don't have a ballot. We don't have a space on the ballot for that. And so I tore up the fucking ballot and, you know, made a big scene in front of everybody and said, I'm not voting because of this. And then Comcast dropped my internet connection suspiciously while I'm talking about this. I have no love for the Democratic Party. I have hate for the Republican Party. But yeah, watching this stuff, man, it is goddamned incredible. It is goddamn fucking incredible. And the different faces that going back and forth from the Democrats and Republicans, you know, the Democrats are asking what seem to be legitimate questions that, seem to me to be legitimate questions of our time. I'd love to show you, in fact, if I could find Cory Booker and his questioning when they had an interaction here. Cory Booker, where you at today? It's when I first tuned in. And it's none of that shit. Might have double frame for Cory Booker and her talking. But I'm looking for Cory Booker. I know what he looks like because I just fucking watched it. I'd love to show you some of this and just see, you know, what the conversation was there. At them, that's not Cory Booker. Come on, YouTube. Fucking give me some frames here so I can try and guess. Seriously? What are all these fucking incredibly white dudes doing in the timeline here? Where's fucking Cory Booker? Did they take him out? You know? Did they remove him? I'm getting white frames wherever Cory Booker was talking to her. Because they don't want it to be on the record. Right there at 1:32. Sorry? 1:32, an hour and 32 minutes? So negative 1:32? Yes, thank you. You are indeed correct. I'd love to show you Cory Booker's time. And this is also, you know, an interesting thing, isn't it? That one of the major ways for people to get exposure to these kind of proceedings in America as well as in the world is apparently for live streamers who usually speedrunners who are watching this shit and going, oh my god, what world do we fucking live in anymore? To just rebroadcast with their own commentary what they just watched. So Joni Ernst, and then we get to apparently Cory Booker. I didn't see this from the beginning. I came in the middle, and let's just see.
How are you? I'm good. You? I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm sure that part of that smile is the fact that I'm the second to last Democrat. I just want to jump right in because I actually found some of your responses to Senator Hirono are really compelling around the public charge issue, and that you dissented in the case. And if I could read it, you wrote that at the bottom, the plaintiff's objections reflect disagreement with the policy choice and even the statutory exclusion itself. Litigation is not the vehicle for resolving policy disputes, because I think the DHS's definition is a rational interpretation of the statutory term public charge. But you were saying to her, which I really found compelling, that you were still leaving the door open for it to be capricious. Was that the word you used?
Yes, so the standard of review under the Administrative Procedure Act would be arbitrary and capricious. So I said at the conclusion of the dissent, because the majority reached both, I said at the conclusion of the dissent that I wasn't resolving that issue because it hadn't been briefed before us, but I just wasn't expressing an opinion. I thought we needed a fuller record. So I did leave open the possibility that the rule would nonetheless be arbitrary and capricious.
Yeah, as I said to you on our phone conversation, trying to read all of your cases, it has been a Herculean task, as has probably yours, preparing for this so quickly. And so maybe I can just go back to asking just a simple question that I hope you'll feel comfortable asking. It's just what I think is an obvious answer again. But do you think it's wrong to separate children from their parents to deter immigrants from coming to the United States?
This is where I came in. This is when I tuned in. Do you think that, taking children away from their parents when, illegal immigration occurs is wrong? Is it wrong, Amy? Amy, is it wrong to remove children from their parents? Amy?
Well, Senator Booker, that's been a matter of policy debate, and, obviously that's a matter of hot political debate in which I can't express a view or be drawn into as a judge.
So I respect that a lot, but I think the underlying question is actually not hotly debated, and just maybe I'll ask it one more time. Do you think it's wrong to separate a child from their parent, not for the safety of the child or parent, but to send a message? As a human being, do you believe that that's wrong?
Well, Senator, I think you're trying to engage me on the administration's border separation policies, and I can't express a view on that. So I'm not expressing assent or dissent with the morality of that position. I just can't be drawn into a debate about the administration's immigration policy.
Right. And
this is a mother, by the way. She's a mother. She has children of her own. She cannot express an opinion on whether or not taking children away from their parents as a means of, he's not even asking in this version of the question, he's not even asking about as a means of, but like as a means of fucking deterring people from illegal immigration, stealing their children from them and keeping them separated so that other people who might immigrate would go, holy shit, is that the kind of, fucking totalitarian government bullshit that they do in America? Let's stay the fuck out of America. This mother of several children cannot take a position on whether or not, having your children taken away from you is something that she thinks is wrong.
of course, the question does have implications, but a very simple, as I said to you yesterday, that we're debating things that, to me, are basic questions of human rights, human decency, and human dignity. I'm sorry that we can't have a simple affirmation of what I think most Americans would agree on. But maybe I can jump back to something we began. Yesterday, I asked you whether you were familiar with studies conducted by the U.S. Sentencing Commission. Do you remember?
Yes, I said I was generally aware. Are you talking about when we talked about systemic or implicit bias and systemic racism?
Yes.
I'm generally aware that there have been studies done.
And so the U.S. Sentencing Commission provides non-binding federal guidelines to federal judges.
Just as a response to weapons-grade incompetence, who says it isn't permanent, it's a guard against child trafficking, it's days at the most if they are actually family, and it's been practiced since the Clinton administration. I'm pretty sure we've heard that it's been a lot more than days in recent days, and if something being practiced since the Clinton administration is okay, and that's an argument that can justify it, then, just go back to slavery. I mean, it's been practiced since the founding of the country. Like, because something that was fucked up was done before doesn't mean that it's not fucked up. And if we're to evolve as a country, we can't lean on, well, other people did it in the past. Have an argument on whether or not, removing children from their parents is something that should happen. And if it's never been more than a few days, which is also a lot. It's also a lot, depending on the age of the child in particular. But really, I can't imagine any time, up to the age of, I mean, fuck, even into my teens, a 14, 15-year-old, like as a child, as a young adult, as a teenager, being removed from my parents and put somewhere with a bunch of people that I didn't know, that wouldn't have scarred me as a human being, and that my parents wouldn't have been losing their fucking shit the entire time. And this is all in response to the, illegal act of, crossing an imaginary line to come into a country. Typically, when you're talking about parents with children, we don't tend to be talking about drug runners or mules for the cartels. We tend to be talking about people who are trying to cross into America so that they can have, opportunity and chance at a better life for those children that they're bringing with them. So in terms of like punishment being equal to the crime, and it doesn't seem to have been just a few hours or just a few days in many of the recent instances, would be my response to that.
Which showed that some of the racial disparities in our criminal justice system, they talk about that considerably. And my colleagues and I on both sides of the aisle, as we worked on criminal justice reform, discussed a lot of them. And some of those, as I discussed yesterday, were examples that federal prosecutors are more likely to charge black defendants who carry with offenses that carry harsh mandatory minimum sentences. They're more likely to charge black defendants than similarly situated white defendants. And black defendants were subject to 3 strikes laws, sentencing enhancements at a significantly higher rate than white defendants, which on average actually added 10 years to their sentence, a significant surrender or seizing of liberty. And you said you were not familiar with that particular study, as you just reaffirmed, or the facts that they cite in the study showing that interracial bias is present in our system. And I think in our discussion, I think it came out that that these issues of bias in our criminal justice system are manifest really in many different aspects of the system, from police misconduct, unlawful use of force, to prosecutor.
And I will stop again to comment on her job is to rule based on the arguments presented in court. So you're claiming she's a shitbag because she's refusing Booker's bait. I'm claiming she's a shitbag because she will not take a position on, the morality of taking children away from their parents. And that's all. Like, I don't have to say anything else. Like, I don't know if you have any children, weapons grade incompetence. But what do you think?
Bias, sentencing disparities. These are wide and vast areas that have been shown to have such implicit racial bias evident in them. And this year, clearly, we've been grappling as a nation with a lot of these issues. And it is a part of our long-standing history. You cannot divorce the role of judges in our history over these some 200 years and how race has been a persistent part of the national narrative, grappling with deep issues of bigotry and bias, overt as well as the biases that exist. We know that many of the unjust deaths of unarmed African Americans at the hands of law enforcement have brought this even more into public concern. And so I just want to ask you, and maybe give you more of a chance to discuss, I understand that you weren't aware of specific studies I cited, which are central to the important work of the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which advises federal judges or provides recommendations to federal judges. So I just want to give you an opportunity today to share what studies, articles, books, law review articles, or commentary you have read regarding racial disparities present in our criminal justice system.
Well, Senator, as you know, the sentencing guidelines do give judges guidance on imposing sentences, and so I am familiar with the sentencing guidelines because there's something when we review sentences that, you know, we need to draw on and apply. In addition to the sentencing guidelines, the Sentencing Commission, as you say, does issue studies, or, you know, sometimes we get things from the Federal Judicial Center that talk about it. It's not something, I'm certainly aware of it. I think it's kind of an obvious point that there's
Right,
still
but
racism,
but
I
and forgive me for interrupting, and I'm especially
No,
concerned because of
that's fine.
Joni Ernst, who's been teaching me about Iowa, and I do not want to make her mad. I was actually asking specifically any books you can name that you've read on this subject, or law review articles, anything that you specifically read outside of the sentencing guidelines.
Well, Senator Booker, I would say that what I have learned about it has mostly been in conversations with people, and, you know, at Notre Dame, as at many other universities, it's a topic of conversation in classrooms, but it's not something that I can say, yes, I've done research on this and read X, Y, and Z.
I respect that. You've answered the question. So, you know, one of the greatest drivers of disparities, I've worked with partners of mine on both sides of the aisle, has been the so-called war on drugs, which really is a war on black and brown people because of the outrageous disparities. And there's no difference between blacks and whites for using drugs or even dealing drugs in America, but blacks are multiple times more likely to be arrested for them. It's why at Stanford, not that I'm impugning my school, lots of drug use, very little arrests, but in low-income communities like the one I live in, equal drug use, but much more arrests. One of the most tragic examples of this, again, partnership on both sides of the aisle, was about the crack powder cocaine disparities, which imposed such harsh, unbalanced penalties for cocaine relative to powder cocaine, that someone caught with a amount of crack cocaine the size of a candy bar would get a roughly the same sentence as someone caught with a briefcase full of powdered cocaine. This is a wildly unjust part. When the Sentencing Commission wrote an amendment to the address to address some of the disparities and made it retroactive to 2008, you actually wrote a law review article in a well-known legal academic, not a law review article, excuse me, you wrote a blog post in a well-known legal academic that cited this decision, and you questioned whether that was a wise call. Now, in fairness, as I reread it today, you raised the administrative hurdles in retroactively reducing sentences, which would provide relief to actually an estimated 20,000 Americans who had their liberty, one of the most fundamental rights, taken away from them. But never in the blog article did you mention that this was unjust. There was no deference to how serious this is for the 20,000 Americans, 98% of them who are black and brown. You just questioned, why are we doing this? Could you tell me why?
Sure, Senator Booker, I think what you're referring to is a short blog post on the Law Prof's blog, and it wasn't an in-depth exploration of the crack cocaine disparity or anything like that. It was simply pointing out the administrative hurdles because my husband was an AUSA, a federal prosecutor at the time, and that had been table talk at our house, just kind of the complexities of retroactively going back. So it wasn't a policy statement, and it wasn't a statement meant to be just. I don't think it was probably more than a paragraph. And it was simply identifying the administrative hurdles because they're clearly, whenever you apply retroactive reform, there are administrative hurdles going forward.
Well, you're a law professor who assigns lots of syllabus to just a guy like me who played football. This is a long article, a couple pages worth, and I'm wondering.
The blog post was?
I have it here in font that my old eyes can't read without glasses.
My old eyes can't see it from here either. I don't have a memory of how long it was.
I guess I'm just saying that you're not citing articles or research that you've read on this issue, yet you have written here about it, and to me that speaks. It makes me wonder and want to talk to you a little bit about your preparedness and priorities, taking the highest office in the judicial world that deals with such long-standing issues of race and in a way that affects the totality of the lives of Americans in every aspect of their life, from their financial well-being to their rights to vote. And I'd like to go through as quickly as I can in my remaining 10 minutes a little bit about the vastness of this problem. And why I'm very concerned that you haven't even cited anything that you've read that would that would speak to this, or the only writings I could find on it, don't even.
This gets pretty fucking hard. I mean, it's not hard to watch. It's just like it's very powerful coming up here with Senator Cory Booker near the end of his presentation. It's made all the more powerful by the fact that he's so like decent and reasonable in his questioning, and acknowledging of her, and just like he's so considerate is how this plays to me. He's very considerate. He's not like attacking her in specific. He's asking her questions. He's setting the questions up, and then asking her specific questions, and giving her a chance to set the record straight. And my God, the way that this wraps up with Cory Booker is fucking powerful shit. I'm sure you'll see it on Twitter in a clip tomorrow, and then John Oliver will have it again a bit further down the line. So far as just dodging questions, yeah, she hasn't really had much of an answer here. He's asking very specific things, but like the look on her face basically is reads like, why are you asking me such specific things at this Supreme Court confirmation hearing? And it's like, because this is the venue for that. Like, yes, this is the place for specific. Like, she won't answer specifics. She won't answer generics when a Democrat is asking, and then when Republicans start asking, she'll swing at the softballs that they're lobbing into her. She'll swing at the things that they, are using to try and be like, nothing's going on here. We haven't populated the courts with our own justices for the past 4 years. Trump isn't out there actually just saying and patting himself on the back, I've seated 200 and some new people in the federal court system. Nobody's done that before. That's not happening. Don't look at that. This is just a general that just happens every day. Yeah, she's going to be in there next to the next 40, 50 years or whatever, but it's just don't worry about it. But yeah, I think we're coming up to the big heavy part here, and I am winding down. We've only been here for 2 hours, but I'm winding down. I want to end on what Cory Booker has to say and on his face here. So you're not going to hear much more from me. It may take us a couple of minutes to get into the heart of it, but stay with us, because this is some hard-hitting shit. It's powerful.
Talk to the injustice of it all. And so you had a conversation with Senator Klobuchar about voting, and I just want to know, have you ever waited 5 hours to vote?
I have not.
Have you ever waited over an hour even?
I have not.
Yeah. Well, in Wisconsin, a state in your circuit, we saw the travesty during the primary earlier this year, during a pandemic, that many polling places were closed and lines were incredibly long. In Milwaukee, a city of more than 500,000 people, located in a county with 70% of that state's black population, we literally saw out of the city's 180 polling places, only 5 were open, pushing people into hours and hours long wait. Now, comparatively, 66 polling places were open in the city of Madison, a predominantly white city, half the size of Milwaukee. And the U.S. Supreme Court made this all worse with a ruling that restricted mail-in voting at the last minute during a pandemic where black Americans are dying at twice the rate of white Americans. And let's be clear, this is part of a nationwide problem with racial disparities in voting. A recent study found that residents of entirely black neighborhoods wait almost 30% longer in lines to vote. And they were 74% more likely to spend more than that half an hour at the polling place. Now, your dissent in Cantor versus Barr, you said something about virtue-based restrictions, which really raised my concern. And that virtue-based restrictions have applied to civic rights like voting and jury service, not individual rights to possess a gun. This approach to the franchise sort of pulls up a lot of history where people used virtue-based restrictions in the past that's been very well documented in our history. Ideas that you can disenfranchise people if they don't meet certain virtue tests. And many of these tests I know you're aware of, but these are like, are you worthy enough if you can't say the whole Declaration of Independence? These are tests that John Lewis used to talk about. Can you count the bubbles in a bar of soap? You're familiar with that, I'm sure.
Senator, I want to be very clear, and I tried to clear this up yesterday. This concept of virtue, I think especially for people who are watching this who don't know about the law, does not mean that I think that people's voting rights can be taken away because they're not good people, or that I think literacy tests are okay, or anything like that. It's a concept that was present in Heller. Cantor versus Barr was not about voting rights, and I very clearly have said voting is an individual and fundamental right that is critical to
So
our
poll
democracy.
taxes, you would say, unconstitutional.
Senator, voting is a fundamental individual right that is critical to our democracy. The 14th Amendment, the point I was making is that the 14th Amendment does expressly contemplate that states might deprive felons of voting rights because it's in the text.
So you're jumping to felonies. I just asked you about poll taxes. And I've tried to point out to you with the picture of just one place, or African-American communities as a whole, waiting so much longer than you and I might have ever waited in lines. I'm trying to draw something here for you. So I just asked about poll taxes. Didn't get to felony disenfranchisement yet. Poll taxes, unconstitutional, yes?
Okay, I was pointing out with the felony disenfranchisement the point I was making in Cantor versus Barr. I wasn't trying to anticipate your questions. I was just saying that that was the context in which I discussed it. I think Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits procedures and practices,
Right. I
poll
think that,
taxes
thank
fall.
you. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
very much. Thank you very much. You're jumping ahead, and I spent so much time on my questioning. So let's jump, though. Let's jump ahead to this. And obviously, the case in Florida that you're well aware of, I imagine, where we had significant felony disenfranchisement. I've read a lot about the history of that going back to the post-Civil War period, the fall of Reconstruction, thousands of blacks being lynched, massacres going on in our country, from the Colfax massacre to the Greenwood massacre, and laws being passed systematically in places to try to make it harder for blacks to vote, designing felony disenfranchisement laws and putting those aside of the black codes, easy to disenfranchise lots of African Americans. So this is a lot of the historical origin here. Now, we see this coming to the fact that now we have places like Florida, and by the way, there are levels of disenfranchisement for African Americans, upwards of, I think in America, 1 in every 17 blacks are unable to vote because of felony disenfranchisement. I can see by your expression that's a surprising data point. I hope that you would look at that. And yet in Florida, about 774,000 people have completed their felony sentences, are now being prevented from voting because they still owe fines and fees. These are Americans, disproportionately black, are being subject to a modern day tax. In other words, if I'm wealthy enough, I can pay that. If I'm African American, disproportionately poor, I can't do that. 1 in 5 black people in Florida couldn't vote because of felony disenfranchisement. Now, this is well-documented history. I've gone through some of it. But as you are seeking this highest office in the land, I bring this full circle of our conversation because, again, another study by the American Bar Association, which I recommend to you, shows that a person with a felony commitment in America is subject to 40,000 collateral consequences. In other words, we now have in America the war on marijuana. It's affected, in 2017, there were more possession of marijuana arrests in America than all the violent crime arrests combined. Overwhelmingly and disproportionately African-American people. Saw it used at Yale and Stanford, not at Notre Dame, just played them in football. But my point is you see that if a black person is not more likely to use marijuana, but they're more likely to be convicted of a felony for it at some 3 to 4 times the rate, I hope you can see that that means that they're going to be more likely to lose other liberties, other rights. It so deeply affects their lives, their voting life, their ability to raise their children when a parent has been put in a position where now, because of that felony conviction for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing, they now can't vote, they now can't get jobs, they now can't get many business licenses. This is such a deeply affecting system that is disproportionately harming one class of citizens based upon race. And so here we are in the midst of and I return to the not normalcy of this moment in American history, where you can't turn on the TV and watch basketball without courageous athletes trying to talk to the heart of America to say, please listen. The system is endangering lives, taking away liberty, taking away your financial well-being, taking you away from your children. There are people marched in all 50 states, 18 other countries, because African Americans, when they're jogging, sleeping in their home, are being killed. And we have a nation now where we're doing a Supreme Court justice hearing, the last days of an ongoing election, to a president that can't even condemn white supremacy, where he tells white supremacist groups, stand by, where they're menacing and literally recruiting people to do so-called poll watching, which many people have sounded the alarm in African American communities, dredging up memories of the past of people intimidating people at polling places. People protesting in our country, all leading into an election where this issue and Roe v. Wade and people's health care, all is going to be on the ballot, but yet we're sitting here acting like this is normal. And I have a great deal of respect for my colleagues, because some of my colleagues courageously have stepped up calling out studies from and articles and writings from the Heritage Foundation, from the Cato Foundation, from AEI, who've all spoke to, with data and facts, the pervasiveness of racial disparities. The America, something's going on where the New York Times bestseller list, the Amazon bestseller list, had books stamped from the beginning: The Color of Law, Just Mercy, The New Jim Crow, bestsellers all throughout America as people are seeking to know what the facts are. And so I hope you understand my heart when I look at a justice who, it seems that, as the fix is in, is going to serve on the Supreme Court and hasn't taken steps to understand the pervasiveness, the facts, the truth about cases of race that are going to come before you in a system right now that so many people feel like is unjust, that those words written on the building of the Supreme Court, equal justice under law, doesn't apply to them. Because they see, as Brian Stevenson says, that we still live in a country where you get better treatment in the justice system if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. And so I appreciate the conversation that we've had, and I wish we had more time. But there's a lot of fear, as I've talked to you about yesterday. There is a great deal of concern about the way this is being done. And I just am deeply, deeply worried about the implications to the fabric of our nation, as I said to you in our phone conversation, with the way this is being handled. And so I'm very grateful with the decorum and candor with which you've answered my questions. I hope that you feel like I've treated you in the same way.
Yes, thank you, Senator Booker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Crapo.
Oh, I'm sorry. My staff is just telling me I should have said this.
Without objection. Whatever it is.
You and the justice are both trying to jump ahead of
Whatever it is.
I appreciate you, Mr. Senator, and the work that you and I
Thank you very much.
have done. So I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following 3 letters into the record. A letter from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights opposing Justice Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. A letter from 83 young people organizations opposing the nomination of Judge Barrett to sit on the Supreme Court. A letter from LGBTQ advocacy groups opposing any nomination where reasonable doubts exist on her ability to administer fair and impartial justice for the LGBTQ people. Thank you.
Thank you. Without objection. Senator Crapo.
So that wrap up there is pretty goddamn powerful in terms of like his concerns. And in case you missed it, I just want to like draw attention to how like his questioning linked together, that it was a complete circle as he was describing it, because he was asking about originally the concept of poll tax, of the idea of if, there was a time in America where if you didn't have the money to vote, then you couldn't vote. You didn't have the right to vote unless you could pay to vote. And that was a means of keeping poor people who tended to be black and Hispanic, tended to be black people because they hadn't been allowed to have their own money. Even though after they'd gotten the right to vote, we can keep them from voting by, putting a tax on voting that they can't pay. And calling it a tax as opposed to buying the right to vote. And that is illegal. And although it was kind of, he had to fucking drag it out of her, she eventually said, yes, of course, no, you can't do that. That is illegal under the Constitution. And then he talks about Florida and about felony convictions and about people being, they have been convicted of a felony. They have served their time, and they now have like the option under law or the ability under law to like clear their names of the felony. And once they're cleared of the felony, then they can, vote again. And the way that you do that is to pay money. So Justice Barrett, if it is illegal to separate human beings from, American citizens from their right to vote in American democracy by way of taxing the polls, making it so you can't vote unless you've got the money. How does that relate to the current state of felony legislation, where if you have enough money, then you can clear yourself of the felony enough to buy your way back into being able to vote. But if you don't have the money, then you can't. What is the difference between that and, then and now? That and this? Is this not just a new version, a nouveau version of poll taxing? Of saying you don't get access to democracy because you don't have the money to afford scrubbing your record so that you'd be allowed to vote again. And by the way, the majority of the prisons are full of people of the same color as you. It's just a coincidence, though. And none of these things have anything to do with one another. Can you explain how a felon has to pay? I'm not a felon, so I don't know. But I'm working on it. I'm going to commit a number of felonies soon. Mostly involved throwing Molotov cocktails. But the concept that he's presenting there is, the idea that even after a felony charge, you can get your right to vote back, but you can't unless you can afford to pay fees and this and that and the other thing. And it's basically putting a charge between you and your right to vote. And the idea being, well, you're a felon, so you got it removed of you, which, you could make an argument for, well, they're a felon, they committed a crime, they have to earn their way back up. It was removed of them because they were a felon. You could make that argument if black people weren't convicted of felonies at a rate of, 20 to 30% more than white people are, who are in the same position, who have committed the same crime, who have committed the same number of crimes previously. Like, the studies are in, the statistics are real. Black people are arrested more than white people. Hispanic people are arrested more than white people. Black people are prosecuted more than white people. Black people are given longer sentences than white people, and black people suffer more economic repercussions on the other side of having served their debt to society. And that's what he's talking about with there are 40,000 ancillary repercussions after having served their debt to society. So you could say, well, they were a felon, they got to re-earn it. But the thing is, when the rules don't apply equally to everybody in the first place, from policing to prosecution to conviction, then what are we really doing here? There are, I believe it's 3 million American citizens in prison today. That is over 1% of the population, it might be 2% of America's population who are eligible for going to prison. You can't send a 14-year-old to prison. So all the 14-year-olds and below are taken out of the 300 and something million that we've got in this country under the population count. So if they're removed and we have 280 million American citizens who are eligible for prison, we have more than 1% of our population of our citizens are in fucking prison. And incidentally, being a nation that is 3 times smaller than China, we have more people in our prison, more of our own citizens in prison than China does with their billion-ish count of citizens. And yet, Americans like to sit on the high and mighty throne and be like, fucking China, that oppressive state, and God, draconian bullshit, and they're just, you're under the thumb of the government over there. Really? Really? Because as far as I can see, the statistics show that if anything is draconian, that if any jurisprudence system on the face of the planet is draconian, we're leading it. USA, number one. So yeah, when you've got and in addition to that, I can add on to the fact that with the, trend now moving toward an era where, we've already got a lot of them out there, but moving toward all the prisons being privatized for profit. So that the government doesn't have to pay, the taxpayer doesn't have to pay for it anymore. Now there's a company out there that owns a prison, and then we give them the prisoners, which sounds a little fucked up when you put it that way, doesn't it? So this is a private corporation to whom we deliver convicted peoples as though they're, cattle or property to be held by a private company for a certain number. Does that sound right to you? Privatized prisons mean that apparently the United States of America and the states that have implemented privatized prisons have given up on the concept that prisons are anything more than a place to throw people you don't want to deal with. Because obviously a privatized institution of a prison is not going to spend any money on efforts to reform, efforts to provide education so that someone who was, leading a more criminal lifestyle when they came in has an access to an education so that when they come out, they have an opportunity to do something other than go right back to it. In fact, of course, and obviously, that privatized institution of penitentiary has every monetary incentive to set their whole system up so that everyone who's in the prison, the most that they can do to make sure that when they leave, they commit another crime and end up back in their prison, that's money in the bank. That's how they pay their bills. It is head count. And so apparently the citizenry of the United States of America, if we are to believe that we have a representative government making choices that are, in line with the people, if we were to sell that idea, then that means that the American people have given up entirely on the concept of crime being primarily a result of poverty. Crime being primarily a result of growing up in a condition and living in a condition where you don't have opportunity. Which, of course, is a non-debatable fact that 99% of criminality comes from lack of opportunity, lack of education, lack of a way up and out of places that, most of the criminals tend to come from them because they and their families before then were put there and then given nothing for, hundreds of years or so. And apparently in America, we've given up on the concept of, you go to prison and then maybe because like in your time at prison, while you're serving your time and serving your debt to society, basic access to avenues for education and job training. It doesn't have to be like you get a degree while you're in prison, but you could at least get fucking trade training. These things used to exist. You used to have libraries in the prisons. Then we privatized them. Now they can't get a meal that doesn't have maggots growing in it because it's cheaper to buy, spoiled meat. And because somehow we live in a country where people living in the suburbs can't imagine ever being or knowing someone who's in prison. So they just those fucking assholes, they all need to be locked up, thrown away. 3 million Americans in prisons, and we've privatized it so that they have an economic incentive to, make sure that when you leave, you're worse than you came in. Because that, you'll likely get out onto the streets and do something else that gets you arrested and get them back. Like, have we? Is this something, like, I'd like to know from America. Could you get on the record here, American citizenry? Just raise your hand and let me know if you've given up entirely on, acknowledging the reality that crime, most of it, comes from abject poverty, lack of opportunity, and oppression. Have you given up on that reality? Because your representatives seem to think you have, and they're giving up on it. They're throwing the concept out. We could save a couple of bucks and we don't have to pay for it anymore. So, we'll just create a revolving door at our prison system. We'll make our jurisprudence system a revolving door. Cops just grab people up. Prosecutors will scare the shit out of people who are innocent to the point where they go, well, I'm black though, even though I'm innocent. And your own fucking, defense counsel is saying, listen, dude, you're black, you say you didn't do it. I believe you didn't do it. The point is, that's a prosecutor and that's a judge in there, and they're going to fucking throw it at you anyway. You need to just take this. You need to say you did it and take the fucking plea deal. We'll just create these revolving doors, and that'll be great for society. We'll have these, centers of poverty where people can grow up and have no opportunity to get out. We'll never provide them a decent education. They'll never have an adequate police force, and they'll be criminal. And then, they'll get picked up for being criminal, and then they'll be put in prison where a private organization actually makes money by the fact that they're in prison. They'll be treated like shit, possibly psychologically just fucked over even worse than they already have been by, lives in these fucking post-slavery ghettos that we still maintain in 2020's United States of America. And then they'll get out, okay, and have nothing, and they'll be a felon. So now they can't get a job as easily, and now they can't vote, and they can't this, that, so they're even more disenfranchised. So then they go back to the communities that they came from, commit more crimes, go back into the system, get more prosecution, more people in prison. Gee, does this sound like a fucking idea to anybody? Does this sound like somebody has a fucking brain at any point in this system? Because I don't think so. I don't think so. Doesn't look like it to me. Yeah, do you think that's going to make, your world better? You think, well, I live in the suburbs, so it'll be okay. Oh, yeah? You don't think felons have cars? I just don't know how the fuck we live in this country. I don't know why I'm still here. Last year, I was talking about, 2 years ago, how long have I been talking about, I need to get the fuck out. Maybe I go to Spain, maybe I go to Canada, depatriate, Where the fuck do I have to go to find people who aren't so fucking stupid that they can be consistently manipulated by people with money and power into doing things that are obviously against their own interests and obviously bad ideas? Not to mention satanically immoral. Can anybody recommend a landing point for my flight? Because I don't know where we are. I don't know how this... There's no coming back from this, is what I'm saying at this point. I think for a long time I've been fooling myself that there was any coming back from this, but I don't think there's any coming back. The only way that America makes a turnaround is if we have some kind of fucking dictatorial overthrow in the opposite direction of Trump. If some populist leader, someone who the people get behind one individual, one person who gets in the office of presidency, gets in the highest position of power that they can, and then turns all the generals against all the fucking governments and just takes everything over and rules with an iron fist dictatorially for the benefit of America. It's like you need a benevolent dictatorship, because every system that is out there that has been built over the course of the past 200 years is made for rich people to keep poor people where they want them. And there ain't any way out. Electing Biden won't solve this. It'll slow it down for a second, but we're already going so fast toward hell, I don't know that we'll even notice. America is over. It's a failed experiment. And leaving the ship doesn't mean you're a rat at this point. It means you got 2 fucking brain cells. Anybody have any hope for this country? Anybody have any hope to like stem and turn around just that situation, just that one situation I just described? You think we're gonna like unprivatize the prisons where we're literally handing over American citizens who have been stripped of their freedoms to private entities who then, Jesus, this sounds like slavery. So a private company just houses people who don't have any rights anymore. It's not the government. It's not like a process of jurisprudence. It's like we hand you over to a private institution. Jesus, this sounds like fucking slavery in 2020, doesn't it? Huh. And that institution actually has an incentive to make sure that you're in there longer, which means that they could actually drum up things that you did while you were in order to, like, you know, keep you in for longer, right? Maybe you're up for parole at this point, but, you know, maybe there was that day that you were a little bit, you got loud in the cafeteria because you having a bad day. You've been locked in prison for 1.5 years, and you kind of losing shit. And maybe we take that and we turn that into a reason to hold you in prison for another 1.5 years because we're making money off the fact that you're in prison. You know, you get out and then you owe money to the system that imprisoned you and took away your right in your ability to make money and didn't give any opportunity while you were in there and didn't give you any education, didn't give you job training, didn't give you any paths out of the shithole that you have found yourselves in. Geez, does this sound like an infinite loop? Does that sound what that is? That's what it sounds to me. It's just, are we in hell? Oh, I think we are. I think we are. Is this the bad place? Mm-hmm. Saw it on the TV. Is there any hope? Do you think that they're going to shut down the fucking prisons that are saving them 8 cents per prisoner now that it's outsourced? Do you think they're going to do that? Do you think they're going to decide to spend 8 cents more every year just for the sake of, like, you know, their own citizens getting a shot at not a fair life, but like coming back from an unfair life? You think that's going to happen? Because I don't think that's going to happen. I think money talks, and morality walks, and decency walks, and conscience walks, and representative democracy walks, and everything walks except for money. That's what I think. And I think that's true of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and all of it. So let me know if you can find a way to have hope in the United States of America. And let me know soon, because, you know, I'm booking flights and writing letters. Dear Cuba, are you accepting refugees from the United States of America? That's where I am, ladies and gentlemen. And with that, I am the Ronin Pawn. And that's my political dissertation for the week. Join me back here next time when, you know, I'll probably interject it some, but I'll be actually, like, you know, I'll be doing something that makes sense for the platform. Twitch, you know, I'll be playing Kerbal Space Program and setting another world record and taking the category I've been running sub 2 hours, well, occasionally talking about how everything's on fire. No one knows what water is anymore. It's just over there, actually. There's all the water. There it is. It's 6 feet away, but everybody's too fucking stupid. They don't even know what it is. They just keep looking at it like, who is that? God, it looks like me. Getting fucked. But thank you all for sticking around and for shouting into the void with me, as is any political dissertation and conversation. I hope to see you back here at the next live stream. Until then, fuck America. On out.